cash from the American taxpayers, more arms, more running up to the election?
Well, it depends. If Netanyahu actually wishes to launch a war, we don't know if that is the case or not. It would show that he is not a very rational actor because he doesn't quite understand the implications of war and how it would adversely affect the Israeli regime. But I think that this is also another step in further delegitimizing the Israeli regime, because Europeans and American public opinion, as you rightly pointed out, are not for war. And even much of the Israeli public is opposed to war.
That's right.
And this would hurt them further in the long run. So he may be out to gain more concessions from the West by them increasing pressure on Iran, but they really don't have much more to do against Iran. They've done all they could. Or he may be hoping that he could get more money from them. But then again, we have to keep in mind that the United States and the Europeans are in the midst of an economic crisis, which in the future years is bound to get worse from what we hear. And I don't think that it will be very easy for the Americans to do much more for Israel than they are already doing.
I'm encouraged by that, and I think a lot of Americans would be encouraged by your point of view, because as you know, we now give, if it rains or shines, $8 million a day to Israel. Some, even in the Congress, are thinking that this ploy, calling Netanyahu's position a ploy, threatening that he'll be unreliable or unpredictable and he might do something crazy, is just aimed at the American taxpayer purse strings. But if you look at the Congress, and what they've done, and you know it very well as a student of this subject, can we really expect that he's wrong on this point? Do you really expect there will be a revolt in Congress on cutting aid to Israel?
No, I don't think so. I think that the American political establishment is very close to Israel, and that, as Netanyahu himself said, that when Israel talks, America listens. And it's difficult to imagine any real change in the United States anytime soon. But what is happening in the United States is that there is popular anger about Washington, about the political order, about the whole way in which the United States is run. People are very dissatisfied with the Democrats and the Republicans and what is supposedly democracy in the United States, yet one sort of, as Noam Chomsky once said, it's a single-party system with two factions. So that is where the real problem in the United States lies. And as the economy deteriorates in the coming years and the standards of living for ordinary people deteriorates, you will have greater social unrest, and it will be more difficult for the United States to launch wars, to fund countries abroad, to fund its military bases abroad. In the long run, I don't think that the Americans really can sustain the sort of position that it is currently sustaining globally. And Israel is a part of that, though it is the closest regime to the political order in the United States of all the countries in the world.
Yes, you mentioned Chomsky. Chomsky's position usually is that, well, Israel, as bad as it is largely the creation of the West, and that the Americans use Israel to attain certain goals. But do you think that the Americans are using Netanyahu's government now as another way to pressure Iran?
No, I think it's the other way around.
Yes.
I think it's I think it's Israel. Israel used to be an asset to the United States, but I believe that it's the other way around now. It's not in the real interest of the United States to support the Israeli regime. It's seen as a colony of the West. And Iran's opposition to Israel is not in any way linked to Judaism or opposition to Judaism. Iran's opposition is because of Zionism, the ideology of a chosen people, of a hierarchy of races. In other words, Iran's opposition to Israel is almost identical to its opposition to apartheid South Africa, in the sense that Iran believed that apartheid South Africa must cease to exist, as it is a racist entity, and the Iranians believe the same about Israel. that it is an illegitimate entity, it must cease to exist, and that Palestinians, Christians, Jews, Muslims must all be able to live side by side. And as there's greater awakening in the region and the globe, and including the West, Israel as an apartheid state is becoming more of a threat to American interests than anything useful to the United States.
Yes. You mentioned the difference between the perception of being anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist. It seems to me that the trend that you've mentioned is spreading. Europeans are thinking that way more, even the American public, who have been, not in a sense terrorized by this accusation that was never far below the surface of being anti-Semitic. But it seems that may be spreading there as well.
Well, the irony is that Palestinians themselves are Semites.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And also, one thing that we do see nowadays is an increasing number of Jews, religious and secular, who are opposed to Zionism, and many of them are quite heroic because they pay a heavy price for their opposition in the West and as a result of government pressure and as a result of the Jewish pro-Israeli lobby in the United States and the West.
Professor Marandi, I'm being told that we're going to take a quick break, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Marandi, let's look a moment at this subject of the alleged effort for a nuclear weapon. Undeniably, Iran has had the capability of enriching to 3.5 and even, let us say, to 20%, and that it would have a greater capability than, say, I guess, 5 years ago. But South Korea, Brazil, and Japan also have that capability, and they haven't pursued nuclear weapons. What's happening here? Not with the American Zionist lobby. I can understand the domination from Tel Aviv. But what about the European Union? Why are they in lockstep on this issue when they ought to know better?
Well, the Europeans are under a great deal of pressure from the United States, and they really can't take an alternative position. At least at the moment, this is how it seems. The Iranian nuclear program actually began with European and American support. The Americans and the Europeans were both building reactors in Iran and facilities to enrich uranium before the revolution. But after the revolution, they withdrew and created a great deal of difficulty for Iran because the Iranians had invested billions of dollars in this industry and trained thousands of people. So the Iranians decided to pursue the program on their own. Iran needs nuclear fuel to decrease its reliance on oil and gas so that they could export more of them. And also Iran, right now, needs nuclear fuel that's enriched at 20% in order to produce medical isotopes for cancer patients. And 800 to 900,000 Iranians a year use these medicines that are produced by the Iranian nuclear industry. And when the United States and the Europeans tried to deprive Iran of fuel, they were basically playing with the lives of ordinary Iranians. So the Iranians are basically saying that as long as we work within the framework of international law, and by the way, when the Iranian nuclear program was revealed in 2003, it was not a violation of international law because any facility that is being or was being built in Iran, there is no need to reveal it, to announce it to the IAEA until 6 months before nuclear material is actually taken on site. So all of Iran's nuclear installations at all times, in the past and present, have been announced within the framework of international law and in accordance with international standards. And Iran's nuclear fuel production now, its new enrichment at 3% and at 20%, is all under supervision 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by IAEA monitors. So what we read in the Western media is very misleading. about the Iranian nuclear program. Iran has no intention whatsoever to produce a nuclear weapon, and there's no evidence whatsoever that Iran at any point in the past has ever attempted to do so.
Thank you. Bring us up to date at Between the Lines in our public generally. What's the issue now between the IEA and the IAEA and Iran and the West on this issue? Why is there any problem now if you've got this record of compliance?
Well, the main problem is that the IAEA is a Western-dominated body, like almost all international institutions. It's located in the West. Its bureaucracy is largely Western. Most of the members of the governing board are Western or affiliated to the West. And therefore, the head of the body is, as we've seen in the WikiLeaks documents, in the pocket of the United States, the current chief, Mr. Amano. Before being chosen by the Americans, effectively, he had told them that I'm on your side on all key issues. So the IAEA is not an independent body. It is not as if it's unbiased. It is very much biased and tilted towards the West. In fact, the majority of the countries of the world, the real international community, actually supports Iran's position on its nuclear program. The non-aligned movement, for example, which constitutes 120 countries roughly.
Yes.
There are 120 members in it, have consistently, throughout the last few years when this issue has been raised, fully supported Iran's nuclear program. So if we're actually speaking of the international community, the majority of the countries in the world support Iran's position. But of course, in the West and in the Western media, the international community means Europeans and Americans.
That's right. As Chomsky reminds us, the international community is America and her friends. But again, public opinion on this issue supports the right of the the Islamic Republic to pursue this. But I think one could take it a step further. I am not convinced that international opinion, certainly in this region, I'm more confident about. It depends how the question is put. But look, the Islamic Republic has disavowed any intention of a nuclear device. But isn't that, frankly, their right and arguably their responsibility in this time and place in the Middle East? Because it would make a deterrent to Israel. And isn't, in fact, that's what Israel is worried about, the deterrent, because once there's a deterrent, as Ali Khamenei, the Wali al-Faqih said, then it will crumble more quickly. What do you say about that? Isn't it an obligation for Iran to seriously consider that deterrence, just like the Americans had and the Soviets during the Cold War, and there was peace?
Well, Ayatollah Khamenei has said from the start that Iran is completely opposed to nuclear weapons, and he said that it is banned in accordance with Islam. And so he's never spoken about a nuclear deterrence against Israel. The Iranians believe that they have deterrence enough. If there is a major conflict in the region, the oil and gas facilities in the Persian Gulf would not last. Oil tankers would not survive any major war. And therefore, the United States and the Europeans know quite well that if an attack on Iran is launched, the global economy will disintegrate, and the world will blame the West. So Iran's strategic position is, and where it is located, and its influence in the region is enough to bring about this so-called balance of terror with the West. But Iran's nuclear program is important for a number of reasons for Iranians. One is it's an issue of sovereignty. If the West denies Iran its right to produce enriched uranium, despite the fact that billions of dollars were invested in this field, many billions of dollars, then Iran is no longer a sovereign country. Iran becomes like Saudi Arabia, it becomes like Jordan. And the revolution, to a large degree, was about dignity and independence. So that will not happen. A second point that I think is very important is that the Iranian nuclear program is very important in for the Iranian economy. The Iranians simply cannot give up the many thousands of people who've gained expertise in these fields and give them and tell them to go drive a taxi. This is immoral and unacceptable, and it would create great anger among the Iranian population. If you look at polls carried out in the West, for example, by the University of Maryland, it has consistently shown that the vast majority of Iranians support the nuclear program in Iran. And interestingly, as you pointed out too, polls indicate that the vast majority of the people in the region support the Iranian nuclear program. While the WikiLeaks show that dictatorships and the dictators in the region, such as the kings in the oil-rich countries in the Persian Gulf, they are very hostile to Iran's nuclear program. But polls indicate that the population at large in Arab countries views things exactly the opposite.
You may get, we may get some more insight into world opinion on this issue from Tehran late next week when the 120-member non-aligned movement convenes in Iran. And subject to correction, I think Iran is due to assume the presidency of the non-aligned movement, a very important body. What are your hopes and what are the prospects for that meeting on this subject, this vital war and peace issue?
Well, I think what is important is that it shows that Iran is not at all isolated. In fact, when such an important gathering of heads of state takes place in Iran, it shows that the West has failed in isolating the country. In addition, I think in the long run that the West is really hurting itself by its really inhuman policies towards Iran. A, because ordinary Iranians become more angry with the West. The constant threat of war is itself an act of terror. But it has caused Iranians to increase trade with alternative countries. Because Iran no longer trades with the West, it's turned to India, to China, to Brazil, to Asia, and it has increased relations with these countries, and therefore strengthened the bond between Iran and these countries. Also, many Iranian young students who in the past, in my generation, many who wished to go abroad to study went to the West. Now most Iranian students, because of this hostile atmosphere, are going to Malaysia, to South Africa, increasingly to China, to India. And in the coming years, when these